Hello everyone and welcome back to the Overseers. I'm Proelios, joined as usual by my co-host Nightwing, and in this episode we'll be doing a team preview of the Toronto Defiant, going into Season 5 of the Overwatch League. As usual, we'll be kicking things off by reviewing the tank line, moving on to the damage dealers, supports, and then the coaching staff, before sharing our final thoughts. So let's start off with MuZe and HOTBA, who are the two tank players for the Defiant this year. And I think let's talk about MuZe first, Nightwing, because I feel like he was one of the most popular free agents going into the previous off season. So, what are your thoughts on him and his performance in the Overwatch League before this?
So I think Muse was, despite some people being high on him, he was still a little bit of hidden gem because I feel like Muse turned out to be the highest value pickup that any team had picked up, any free agent coming in from contenders, because unlike Mag, who struggled and didn't really kind of perform to the same level that he'd been hyped up as just being the absolute best free agent. Muse wasn't talked about as much coming into last year, but he definitely, punched much above his weight in that sense because he was extremely good at the wrecking ball, in my eyes, first of all. And he worked extremely well with the LA Gladiators to even sort of, show good play where his hero pool wasn't that diverse and wasn't that deep. For example, I don't particularly think his Rhine was extremely impressive, but he did make it work here and there with the LA Gladiators. And that goes to show that he is coachable and that he can work within a system really well. So I think that's big props to Muse. I do think he was probably the third best wrecking ball, definitely, last year after Fate and possibly Gaga. And that's a bunch of big shoes to fill. I mean, because those are two superstars in that role, and some of the world's best players on that role. So I think Muse coming in for the Toronto Defiant is still great. He's coachable. He's young. Uh, he's gonna be able to really fit within this team system as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Even I was super high on Muse going into this off season because he proved to be a highly skilled and a flexible main tank, and he was undoubtedly one of the best rookies of 2021. And it was mainly due to his really disciplined gameplay on every single main tank hero, I feel. He was always playing the right positions, always engaging in the right way. Like his level of aggression was like absolutely spot on most of the time, and because of that, he's a super reliable teammate, right? And I feel like because of all of these factors, he will easily be a top 10 tank going to Overwatch 2. And I just feel like if someone is as talented as Muse just coming into the Overwatch League from Tier 2 and puts up such a fantastic performance, we can expect great things from them going into a completely different game. Um, just because of their flexibility and like the skill that they've showcased. So super high on Muse, and we'll see how he partners up with Hotba, even though not at the same time. But these guys have to complement each other, right? Because I'm definitely nowhere I don't rate Hotba nearly as well as I rate Muse. Even though he had some good moments with the Philly Fusion last year. Like as usual, I feel the issue with Hotba is that he's an inconsistent player, and like I feel like the only thing he was consistently good at was playing Zarya and double bubble comps last year because he just maintained high energy, coordinated, engages very well with Mano. But even though he's shown a lot of flexibility before, I don't think he'll be very competitive in season 5 simply because his skill level as well as consistency isn't up there with many other off tank players. Do you agree with these points, Nightwing?
I think Hotbar's real heyday was in that first season where he could, go to the DPS role here and there. And that gave him a lot of value as a player because he generally played an all right DPS when required. Because the game was so chaotic back then, you could just put a tank player randomly on DPS and just sort of cross your fingers. But I think as the roles have become definitely more cemented in place, uh, you can see that HOTBA's performance on that individual tank role isn't as cracked as you'd probably hope for, because you can see some of these other top tier, diva or generally off tank players, they're they're a little bit loopy. I mean, if you look at Fury's POV, the man's doing 180s and 360s all the time, trying to hit every ult in the book. I think Hotbar's just not quite there mechanically, like you said, Proelius, with the very best off tank players, or I guess now just tank players in the league. And I think that's really shown over time. I do have to give him respect for coming into the Philly Fusion late after the team had a lot of visa issues and roster issues last year, and he probably didn't have that much time to develop synergy in the early parts of the season. But that becomes inexcusable as the season goes on, right? And you could see that while he did hold his own here and there, and I could even say that there was a few maps here and there where Hodba was probably the best player on the Philly Fusion. That team was a little bit lost at times, despite the star talent that they did have here and there. And I feel like Hotba does have some room for redemption still. I think because that team was in a bit of a chaotic state last year, this is a new game. Hotba can definitely show that old streak of flexibility once again, in case new heroes are added to the tank role in Overwatch 2, and he can expand his repertoire to the heroes that we now consider main tanks. So that old season 1 Hotba, style might even be applicable to this new Overwatch 2 um, just meta game, because you're not requiring that specific skill set required from Overwatch 1 off tanks anymore. You need a more generalist sort of tank in some aspects, and you need to focus on the damage aspect, which Hotba often does go for. Actually, he's not super peel focused. He does tend to go quite aggressive at times, and I think that might just help him a little bit. That said, I don't expect him to be at that very top echelon, but I think he can hold his own still, and especially being in a sort of tank duo with MuZe, I think they'll still be able to get some good use out of him for this upcoming season.
Yeah, I think the flexibility aspect is certainly going to help Hotba adjust to these reworked or new heroes in Overwatch 2. So all in all, I think Toronto still has a pretty good tank line. They've got a lot of flexibility going on, and they've got two players that have proven themselves to be formidable at some points during the Tier 1 careers. So I think they're sitting in a good position with just two tanks right now. They should be open to picking up some new talent as they learn which other tank players on the market are getting good at this game. So it's good that they've left kind of a slot for that position. But let's move on to the damage dealers then, Nightwing. Starting things off with Heesu. Um, Heesu, as we know, is a really solid hit scan player, and he is known for his Sombra, but he didn't really have many great games on her last year. Uh, but that said, he did impress me a lot on more aim-based heroes, especially the Hanzo, because of his solid positioning, which enabled him to get a lot of free snipes on his opponents without being contested too much. And he also played a little bit of Ashe last year, which I remember being impressed by, like going for those headshots rather than focusing on damage. And it ended up working wonders. So I think he will be very competitive going into Overwatch 2, especially considering that he's kind of used to KDG's style of coaching at this point, and he's also being reunited with Hot. My bad. Was Hotpa playing with Heesu? I don't think so. Never mind. He's not. Yeah, never mind. So essentially, Heesu's kind of used to KDG style of coaching, and it has worked really well for him with the Toronto Defiant, as well as with the Philly Fusion when they were both over there. So I think that's really going to help them out. What are your thoughts on Heesu?
So you come in uh, season 3 looking at Heesu as a player that they've only really picked up for Sombra and the like, where you'd say, he's a contemporary to Lip on the Sombra and not much else. You want Carpe in doing all the funny head clicky stuff. But then you could see as that season went on that Heesu was definitely very, very talented on basically every hit scan, as well as, like you said, other snipers such as Hanzo. Um, and he's pretty much been a carry player for the Toronto Defiant, despite some shortcomings here and there, which obviously you can expect from any player. Um, and I think he is probably one of the stars of this team, regardless of whatever shortcomings he might have here and there. Um, I think Heesu has an insane amount of talent, and I hope that's put to good use, is all I really have to say. I think he's going to have to sometimes share time with some of the other DPS that have been picked up, that have recently been doing well in contenders. But if it were up to me, I'd probably put Heesu in as a mainstay and then swap the other two rookie DPS in and out, depending on uh, what favors the team and what favors the meta.
Yep, and like to compliment him on the flex DPS role, Toronto have to sign two DPS players, that is Finale and Aldo. And let's talk about Finale first. Now, Finale is a DPS player coming in from Uprising Academy. He's a flex DPS, and I haven't seen much of his gameplay, but I remember like seeing him flex onto a lot of heroes during the couple of games I did watch, especially on the Reaper. Like they were playing Neo Goats, and his Reaper was just absolutely fantastic. Naturally, I am not talking about his aim here because at that level anybody can aim on Reaper, but just his decision making and cooldown usage was spot on. So, although it's not much to go off on, I just feel really optimistic about this pickup, and especially because KDG has picked him up, right? Because if you guys have noticed, KDG has a really good eye for rookie talent. Like every single year, he has a tendency to pick up skilled rookies for his team. Like if you remember when he was back with the Soul Dynasty in season two, he had picked up Marvel and Fitz, who both performed quite well that year, and Fitz continued to perform even after that. Then in season three, when he was with the Fusion, he had picked up Heesu and Alarm, both again mind-blowingly fantastic pickups. Last year he got Ansunje and Aspire. Aspire was like a surprise pickup that worked well in parts, and Ansunje was just a really nice stable main support presence. So I really trust KDG with these rookie pickups. So Finale should work out really well for them. And yeah, I think I'll let you share your thoughts on Finale, Nightwing.
Yeah, I think Finale's flexibility is definitely nothing to scoff at. I mean, I think based off of what the game was during the contender seasons that he played in, his bread and butter seemed to be the Echo. For the most part, obviously that, and some of the other projectile heroes. He also played a really good May against Redbird Esports in some of the matches when he was playing for the Uprising Academy. Uh, and that goes to show that he is more of a positioning and also sometimes damage based player. He should work well within the team, have a lot of flexibility. It's hard to really gauge how far up he'll be on that DPS ranking, but I think the flexibility is a good sign that he'll be able to pick up more heroes with that new game coming out. And I think that's a good sign for the Toronto Defiant.
Do you also quickly want to walk us through Aldo, who's the second flex DPS pickup for this team?
Sure. So, although was a player that I was not very high on initially, after looking at his performance on the London Spitfire in season 3, which was, in a word, atrocious. Just the entire team in general. It was kind of sad to watch each match, and it was honestly very skippable because it felt like my entertainment was just being robbed from me. But I've been told, and I've seen a little bit of his results ever since then, and he has been doing quite well for himself ever since then in contenders. He's just been grinding it out, with that Sigma grind set. And that's worked out quite well for him. He's hopped through a few teams here and there, working for O2 Blast and Team BM. Uh, Team BM is an especially interesting case because I think he was probably the only, like, not the only, but he's probably like the best player on that roster, and he sort of hard carried them uh, to that fourth spot in contenders, which is, not exceptional, but most of it was most likely due to all those contribution from what I could see. So I think that's a good sign that although may still be redeemable, and his Overwatch League performance in the past may not be the only indicator that you might want to look at, but it also goes to show that he's probably not the best rookie DPS prospect. Uh, I think for me that's clearly proper from the SF Shock, but yeah, I think it's still reasonable to hold out some hope that although will be good this season.
Yeah, most certainly. Like, even I wasn't high on, although after watching the absolute dumpster fire that was the London Spitfire in season 3. But although I certainly redeemed himself to some extent back in contenders, I was especially impressed with his Tracer while I was watching him play most recently. Uh, He plays a really pokey style on Tracer and relies on his ability to land good pulse bombs to win fights. And that ends up working wonders because he's very good at landing those sticks. And although I haven't studied his other heroes as closely, in general I've seen that he's very competent, and I feel like a lot of people could be sleeping on him, and that might just be my kind of KDG rookie pickup buff in my head, but I do feel like although could be really good for this team. Um, I think on that note, should we move on to the supports, Nightwing?
Yeah, let's go.
Alright, so let's kick things off with Chorong, who is a main support from Korea, coming in from Talon Esports. Now, I was really impressed with Chorong when I watched him in his most recent games. He is quite flexible, like plays all main support heroes, but as of late, he has been grinding a lot of Brig, and undoubtedly, I feel that is his main. That's like his best hero. He's just really smart with ability usage. Like he peels really well with his whip shot as well as his stun. His inspire uptime is great. His positioning is really safe, and his flex support never really has to worry about losing their lives when he's around them. So I think it's a great pickup by Toronto, and I'm expecting him to be like quite a vocal player. I think for this team because I don't see MuZe being as like vocal and as much of a leader as Chorong could be. What are your thoughts on him, Nightwing?
Yeah, I mean, uh, I was telling Proelius before we started recording that I was just not able to find a single word of Chorong playing anything apart from Brig. But when I did watch his Brig, I think it was one of the best Brigs I've seen in terms of how incredibly solid he was with basically every cooldown alongside his positioning. And staying alive in sort of a Brig Zen comp is quite hard, but Chorong was managing it consistently against multiple divers, a lot of pocketed echo damage, and that's among the that's against some of the best echoes that Contenders Korea had to offer, and Chorong just giga chads and lives through all of it, and I think that's a good sign that you might be seeing another not maybe not skewed level talent, but definitely another gem of a Brig player coming into this next season, and hopefully he can translate that into some other heroes as well. Um, because if Brig's not in rotation, then you might just be in trouble. But I think that's where I'm really counting on Chorong to show some of his flexibility, which I haven't been able to find, unfortunately, because Korea are just a bunch of Brig simps in the sense that they love using that character in basically every single one of their comps alongside Sombra. So hopefully that's an aspect of Chorong we'll get to learn about this upcoming year. I think he's probably one of the better main support uh, kind of prospects coming into this season. I think flex support, there's a lot of new contenders uh, that you could put a name in the hat for, but main support, I think Chorong is probably at that very top of the list for rookie main support talent coming in. So I want to see how that pans out.
Yep. And just to round up the roster, the Toronto Defiant have picked up Twilight from the San Francisco Shock. And I know you're a big Twilight fan, Nightwing, so I'll let you go first on this one.
Yeah. First, let me just state my absolute displeasure for the fact that you think it's them rounding out the roster with that them adding Twilight. I think the man's a nutcase. I mean, I think this guy is easily, easily top 5 flex supports of all time in the Overwatch League. And that's a highly, highly contested role. But I think Twilight is just cracked, despite how many memes might have been made out of his one, moment of weakness with the sim teleport and that duplicates comp, or that what was it, the sim Reinhardt comp they were running on Junkertown, the San Francisco shop. I think apart from that, Twilight is just extremely, extremely solid. He's insane on basically every flex support. I think some of his flexibility still needs to be developed. I don't think he's at that very top with heroes like Brig. That said, I think that's something he may have had the opportunity to develop in this off season. And I think the characters that he can play to an extremely, extremely high level, competing with some of the world's other best players. And I think it's just a real shame almost that anyone would consider that he's rounding out a roster instead of absolutely carrying it. I think it's going to be him and Heesu that are going to be at the forefront of this roster, with MuZe probably being at that second tier, and then everyone else sort of behind them. So yeah, huge hopes for Twilight. I'm smoking that copium for him, and hopefully that turns out well in my favor as well as his own favor.
To any boomers watching this, copium is not a drug, so please do not call the cops. And just to clarify over here, even I am really high on Twilight. I do feel like he's a very solid flex support. Um, I think like mostly Twilight's been known for his Ana gameplay, but I do think he has a fantastic BAP as well because I mean his aim is great in general, and I must say I'm really happy to see him getting a starting spot once again, since he was being overshadowed by Violet on the SF Shock. So because of his flexibility and mechanical skill, I think he'll do very well in Overwatch too. And Nightwing has elaborated really well, so I don't think I need to make any further points over here. Um, let's then talk about the coaching staff here, Nightwing. Starting off with head coach KDG. Now, let me briefly touch upon him. I've already described how big a fan I am of his ability to spot rookie talent, but he's in general a very smart coach with a lot of tier 1 experience, and he has already coached the Defiant for a year, so I feel like he's comfortable with the management and with naturally Heesu, who's the only player retained from the roster from last year, and I feel like he's got much better pieces to work with this year and can utilize them quite well. So I'm quite high on KDG. I'm excited to see how he coaches this team, which direction he takes them in. He's definitely one of the better coaches, I feel, and one of the more experienced. So yeah, any thoughts on KDG you want to add, Nightwing?
So I think, and I'm almost reflecting some of the things you've told me before, Proelius, is that KDG has sometimes just gotten really lucky with his scouting, and I think that's a really important skill of his. And I think it's really good that you mentioned this earlier in the episode. But sometimes it's the skill level of his roster that really helps him. And you could see that last year was a very silent season for the Toronto Defiant. Sort of because of that, because they didn't have an extremely exceptional roster. I do think that KDG did drill in, or at least help drill in, some really good compositional sense to the Philadelphia Fusion when he coached them, because you could see in that playoffs comp they played in season 3 that they were really, really dominant and knew how to execute for basically every scenario. That said, I do not think that the Toronto Defiant showed that same level of execution and just preparedness for whatever the enemy team might throw at them. I think KDG's scouting skill is great, but I don't know if it's him specifically that's really helping teams execute comps really well. And that's why I think he needs some really good assistant coaches on his hands, because based off of what he did or actually based off of what he could not accomplish in the past year, I am still questioning what he can get done on that competitive level. In terms of actually executing comps on the ground. So that's a little bit of a question mark for me. I hope that the gamble he's taken on some of these players, especially players like Aldo, who I'm still slightly questioning the pickup of, I hope that it works out well for them, but it's still a gamble. And I hope that KDG's scouting has led him to a good decision there.
Yeah, and um, let's quickly also talk about the assistant coaches, which are Mobydik and Yang One. I don't really know anything about Yang Wan other than the fact that he's been with the Defiant for a year, so he's got some experience working with KDG. And they've also got Mobydik, who was with the Philly Fusion for 2 years. And again, I don't really know much about him, but he's also worked with KDG before, so I guess it's good that there are two guys who have worked with KDG before, which is better than no guy having worked with KDG before. That's all I really have to say. I don't really know where I was going with that, so I'll just let you go next, Nightwing.
Yeah, so Yang One has, before working for the Toronto Defiant, he worked with that legendary runaway roster for which got to the grand finals in 2019, and that's basically where he's been throughout his career as a coach before he joined the Toronto Defiant. And so there's two ways of looking at this. Either you look at that past performance with that exceptional team and say, Yangwan probably must be a really good coach to be able to coach those players. Or you could look at that the past year's performance of the Toronto Defiant, which was nothing exceptional, and question his skill there. So I think it's still up in the air of what I really think of him. I think it's probably just going to be a developmental year for him as well, and we'll find out how well he's suited to coach Overwatch League. I guess I am expecting that he'll at least partially contribute to the kind of comp executions that the Toronto Defiant do, because I don't think that's KDG's main core strength. So Yang-Wan and Mobydik are going to have to handle that. Mobydik, on the other hand, has hopped around a few teams for the Philly Fusion, O2 Blast, Energy, and the Toronto Defiant itself. He's been on a few good teams that have performed well, but again, it's hard to say because it's hard to really know in depth about non-English speaking coaches as an audience that obviously receives information in English, right? So I think it remains to be seen, but hopefully he can get something done for the team. So that's pretty much it. I think the only other member of the Toronto Defiant staff I want to mention is probably Karkyu, who signed to their payroll. Maybe he can give all of the players some tips for each hero. Maybe feature them in a video here and there. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good valuable point that I forgot to add over there. All right. So before we close things off, Nightwing, overall thoughts on the roster. Where do you think they're going to rank? Do you think they make the playoffs? How deep do they go in the playoffs if they make it there?
I think it's honestly difficult to say whether or not they make the playoffs. I think if they do, they're going to have a real tough battle in front of them because teams have really leveled up in both regions. And I think it's going to be an uphill battle for them, but they do have an exceptionally good support line, especially. They have a decent tank line, and they have a little bit of a question mark on the DPS line. I think Heesu is consistent, but there are some players that are better than him. And the other two, I think KDG is taking a bit of a risk on. So as a whole, the team is still slightly iffy, but there are more positives than negatives. So I would definitely still look forward to seeing the Toronto Defiant perform well, or at the very least perform better than they did last year. Because last year it was a little bit of a freak show almost, where they signed Aspire at a random time. They would sometimes put him in, sometimes not put him in. They were a little bit confused last year, but this year they seem to have a little bit more of a solid plan, and they've got some roster spots to add in case things don't work out very well with any particular player.
Yeah, so all in all, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic than you about this team Nightwing. It's maybe because I'm on a bit of the KDG rookie hype train, as I mentioned, but I think that a lot of their season is going to rely on the tank line because I do have faith in the DPS line as well as the support line. Um, on the tank front, I feel like if um, HOTBA and MuZe can prove to be mechanically really competent, as well as really flexible, it's going to be a pretty breezy ride for them. Um, like another advantage that they have is that the full roster is Korean, so communication is not going to be much of an issue. So with a purely Korean team, with a lot of experienced players, with many playoff runs among them, I think it's going to be a much better season than last year. They can certainly break into the top 10 in my opinion. This opinion might change after we review the other teams in more detail. But essentially, I'm just really optimistic. That's all I'm going to say. I don't think they're going to be top tier probably, but it's still going to be a better run for them than last year. So,
Yeah, I think
yeah, go on.
yeah, I think they're sitting pretty comfortably in that second tier of the NA region, in my opinion. There's teams that I think are going to do extremely well, or at least better than the Toronto Defiant, such as the Dallas Fuel, arguably the LA Gladiators, maybe even the Houston Outlaws. Um, and then there's some teams that are probably sitting around the Toronto Defiant, like the Washington Justice, and depending on how things go, maybe the SF Shock, because I think these teams have some question marks that might just let them down a little bit. Uh, I think for Toronto, they do have a very solid team around them. They just need to, I think, execute really well and have good understanding of the meta. Uh, because I do personally feel like I'm not sure if I attribute that to KDG. So that's something I'll have to see, I guess, as the season goes on. But they should be able to probably make it to some of those tournament finals, mid-season tournaments, international and regional tournaments. But it's going to be a little bit of a competition for them to do so.
Mm-hmm. And I think on that note, we can round off this episode. Thanks for watching. If you liked our content, feel free to share it across any platforms on which you know other analysts. Share them on your Discords, share them on your subreddits, whatever you want to do. I think it's going to be really interesting to see our perspectives, especially going into a completely different game. So just do us a solid, yeah? And we'll see you in the next episode, which will be about the Guangzhou charge. Bye bye.